The Zoom was working earlier, but I got to thinking I had plugged in this projector and that's someone else phone.
Anybody have any announcements they'd like to make?
So
Agenda?
Yeah, and that should be there. Zoom probably still set.
I think all of you know our parliamentarian. Morgan was our parliamentarian a year ago. She did a wonderful job and she's agreed to do it again for this year. She's a University of Wyoming student, a sophomore, studying ag communications.
oh, it's showing up there.
She's involved as an officer for the Community Farm Bureau in Wyoming. She hails from California Central Valley. She's been involved in FFA and 4-H and Farm Bureau. And
Should be.
again, we'll do a second year. You're probably in the first couple of years.
Figure out.
See if we can test them.
Work would be like
If we've got.
Hello.
Goodness. Thanks.
They just brought it, I brought it to you.
You should be able to.
Can you hear me, Dave?
Hey.
Mr. Salmonsen.
Hey, Dave, can you hear us?
This is how I'm talking to the governor.
Ah. Hey, Dave, can you hear us at all?
Can you hear us, Dave?
Does anyone have his phone number?
Ken, do you have Dave's phone number?
Oh, I can't get it. No, it's supposed to come out the sound system, but for some
We
reason
can hear
he
it,
can't hear me.
Spoke a little, but he can't hear us.
Yeah, he works. Oh, it looks like you just got my email.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Dave.
Good to be with you this morning. I hope you all can hear me. Here today to visit with you about update on trade issues at the end of this year. I'm going to, again, I'm Dave Salmonsen, Senior Director of Congressional Relations at American Farm Bureau. And I want to do this update and do it by regions. I think it makes more sense to talk about the different regions of the world and how we're doing on trade these days. So I'll start in Asia, talk a little bit about China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and a few other issues that go along with that. So let me talk about China first. As you all know, just earlier this year, back in January, the US and China signed their phase 1 trade agreement. Became effective in the middle of February. And it had two main components, of course. One was purchases, which we were all desperately interested in at the time and still are, and standards, which also has a huge impact since the US and China have been trying to work on getting China to improve their standards for many, many years, especially since they put their restrictions on beef back in 2003. So on the purchases side, China said they would buy $80 billion of US agricultural products over the next 2 years, so 2020, 2021. Not evenly split, about $36 billion in 2020, the remainder in 2021. And that was actually something that was unprecedented in doing trade agreements. Usually, trade agreements are always done with lowering tariffs, and then there's an expectation and removing other barriers. And then there's an evaluation of what that will mean to future sales, but it's never exactly certain. Well, in the China agreement, this is very certain. So this is a very interesting approach and different to doing trade agreements. Well, how have we done so far in purchases and sales to China? Well, as of the latest figures we have from both USDA and the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, they're saying that as of now, we have either exported or contracted for sale over $23 billion. So that's a little over 70% of what we'd sell to China in this calendar year. Now, things did get off to a very slow start. You had the COVID-19 that, of course, we know hit China first, slowed their economy down quite a bit. They were locked down, didn't have much product moving at all. And of course, along with that, we still had the tariffs. You know, the US had put tariffs on China. There was retaliation by China, tariffs on a lot of US ag products. But as time went by and China needed to have product, wanted to live up to their purchase commitments, they basically took the tariffs off as far as the extra retaliation. So our product was able to go through. Purchases have really, as we thought they would, improved into this fall. You know, a lot of our sales to China are heavily grain oriented, primarily soybeans, but also sorghum and corn. And, you know, they buy at harvest time, of course. So they buy from us in the fall. And then in the spring, they buy from Brazil, take advantage of their harvest time. So they bought a lot of soybeans and a lot of corn. And so they're moving ahead on that. Now on the standard side, and that certainly has a big impact on meat sales, beef, pork, poultry, dairy products. So of course, they have moved ahead very strongly to do those, to live up to their commitments. They had 57 standards commitments so far, and they are, you know, done about 50 of them. So they've made commitments in beef and all these other areas. So we look forward to seeing those improve. There have been some increases of sales so far to China. And over 3,500 US processing facilities are now approved for export to China for all kinds of products. So on the standard side, they are moving ahead. And you might say, okay, you know, we're interested in the purchases. Well, of course, we're all interested in that. But the standards are going to go on forever. Well, as close to forever as we can get, I suppose. Remember, the purchases are a 2-year commitment, but changes in standards we hope will continue way beyond that. Remember, China imports over $140 billion of ag and food products from around the world annually. And even at our best of times, 6-7 years ago, when we sold the most we ever did to China, we were around maybe 30 billion a year. And then we fell back. So now we got to move back. So the point of that is there is a lot of opportunity for growth in sales to China. So I'll stop with them and move on to some of the other countries. Japan, I'll remember last January, we also signed an agreement with Japan, primarily making sure that the US kept up with the tariff treatment of a lot of other countries, especially the countries that were involved in the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that the US had left in 2017. Well, the other countries involved in it got preferential tariff treatment into Japan, and the US was left behind. So, you know, where the other countries were moving into the mid-20s as far as tariffs on beef imports, the US was still stuck at 38.5%. Well, now with the US-Japan agreement, we immediately were treated the same on import tariffs as all other countries are with Japan. So we're seeing that. And of course, especially the beef tariff, which is now around 25%, will over the next several years go down to about 10%. So that's good news for Japan. There's still more to do. You know, this also, in the same way as China was, it was a phased agreement, meaning it wasn't a comprehensive free trade agreement. It didn't go before Congress. It was an agreement between this administration and the Japanese government, and it dealt on specific issues, ag being one of them. So there's more to do. You know, we got the tariffs decreased for a wide variety of products into Japan, but we really didn't get the improvement in SPS standards. There's some issues to do there. There's some other ag products that weren't included. So there is scheduled to be or expected to be a phase 2 negotiation to take care of a lot of other issues with Japan. That is not started yet, but that is a commitment that both sides have. South Korea. You may remember we also did a updated agreement with South Korea about 2 years ago. And for our beef exports particularly, Japan and South Korea are our 2 largest export markets when it comes to US beef. So we're happy to get those agreements done and moving ahead, and both with Japan and South Korea. Now that brings up another issue of countries in that area, Taiwan. Again, to close out Asian countries, we're, thinking about starting a free trade agreement negotiation with them. Taiwan came forward and said they would reduce some longstanding barriers they've had to pork and beef from the US. There's talk of moving ahead with a trade negotiation to increase that market even more. So more attention being paid to that. You know, as we look forward, and I get that question a lot, especially over the last few days, people ask, well, what about the Trans-Pacific Partnership? Is that ever going to come back? I have no idea what the next administration will do with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I'll just point out that some of the things that were in TPP were accomplished during this administration. I just mentioned the agreement with Japan, which was a big reason for the US to be involved in TPP. When you remember the countries that were in TPP, we already had trade agreements with Australia, with Peru and Chile, of course, with Canada and Mexico. And we didn't have a trade agreement with Japan, nor with New Zealand or Vietnam or Malaysia. So, the real reason, though, that the US got involved was to use that to get a trade agreement with Japan. Well, we've got one with Japan. And of course, we also updated NAFTA to now be the USMCA with Canada and Mexico. So from the ag point of view, we'll have to watch and see how that develops, but a lot of what we were concerned about in dealing with those issue areas has also been accomplished. Let me talk about the US a little bit. It's like the Americas, you might say. Of course, the big issue over the last several years, which started right off this administration, was dealing with USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. We know that went into force on July 1st of this year. Much the same as far as agriculture goes as NAFTA. And remember, the reason to go ahead with changing NAFTA was primarily on the manufacturing side. An awful lot of the changes were dealing with the auto industry, with heavy manufacturing, changing the rules of origin, how much of a car has to be made in the North American countries to get the basically no tariffs to move between the countries. And that was increased from about 60% up to 75%. So the whole point was to move more manufacturing back to the US. So that's, that accomplished that. For agriculture, the issues were primarily maintaining tariff-free trade with Mexico, trying to improve our trade with Canada, especially in dairy and poultry, where they still have their supply management programs. There were several other issues, but there were also notable issues that were brought up early, which of course didn't get dealt with and are continuing to go forward. We had a lot of discussion about seasonal produce issues, Mexican imports of fresh and Canadian imports. And USTR, USDA, and the Commerce Department have recently put out a plan and are taking action with some trade investigations on those issues, especially dealing with fruits, blueberries particularly, but there's a host of other products that are going to be subject to investigation and potentially some trade actions. So that's something that's happening outside of USMCA. We also need to remember the softwood lumber. That's been going on for decades. The US has some tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber imports. There have been agreements that have come and gone on that issue with Canada, but that issue continues. And I know an issue that's people talk about, we have the country of origin labeling issue that we all know about. That was, nothing about that was included directly in the USMCA. That continues obviously to be an issue going forward. Now let me talk about some of the things going on in Europe that have to deal, importance that we pay a lot of attention to. Primarily, we've got negotiations with the United Kingdom. Those started back in May. And the US, is trying to make a deal with the UK, with Great Britain, as they leave the European Union. And so a lot of issues are trying to get the UK to change their regulatory approach. That as part of the European Union since 1973, they've lived under and have gotten used to. So they still have the same regulations that the EU has on restrictions on our beef exports because of growth hormones, ractopamine in pork production, how chickens are processed. And so the real aim of our negotiators is to try to get change, to let them, go with risk assessments, science-based approaches, not the precautionary approach, which they use to justify trade barriers that they've been doing for these many decades. Those negotiations have gone through about, I think, 5 rounds virtually. Was on a call yesterday with our folks who are the negotiators at the Trade Representative's office. All they can really say is that they're engaged and will continue. So no real thought that this is going to end anytime soon, at least on the ag side. I think the British negotiators are still trying to work out their trade deal with the European Union as they leave, and aren't really willing to commit to very much with the US until they get that sorted out. There's a bit of triangle trade going on here between Brussels, London, and Washington, all sides looking at each other to see who gives on what. So it's a complicated approach that's going on with them, but there is real opportunity here to, we sell about $2 billion a year to Great Britain. They sell about $1 billion of ag and food to us. There's certainly opportunity for growth. We haven't gotten much of our, especially meat products, into there for a long time. we really are looking for equal access. You know, Great Britain is a food importer. They buy from a lot of other countries. We want to be on the same playing field as they are, and we know we can expand that market. Directly with the European Union, even though there were supposed to be negotiations, they really haven't gotten anywhere. Both sides are far apart on a range of issues. Primarily, the Europeans do not want to talk about agriculture. They don't want to engage in all those sanitary and standards issues I just talked about that we've had with Europe for decades and decades. So this administration has said no agriculture, no negotiations. So those really aren't going anywhere. What is going on is back and forth on tariffs because of that WTO case dealing with Boeing and Airbus about which country subsidizes more. Again, that's been going on for over 16 years. Recently, some awards were given in that case. The US was awarded retaliation first and has put some retaliation on European products. Now, the EU was just said they could retaliate. They've started putting retaliation, meaning higher tariffs on some of our exports on a variety of products. So the idea is that inflicting pain on each other's economies will lead both sides to sit down and negotiate out a settlement, but sometimes that takes a while. So, but that's kind of what's dominating what's going on with the EU right now. Do remember we have, and this was put in place a year ago after many years of discussions, a non-hormone beef agreement with the European Union. They agreed to take up to 45,000 tons annually of non-hormone beef. Again, that took quite a while to get into place, but that is there now. Other issues that are going to be engaging us as we go forward into next year. Trade Promotion Authority. Remember that? That's the law that Congress needs to pass every several years, every 6 years or so, that allows a trade agreement to be considered for an up or down vote without amendments before Congress. Has a lot of negotiating objectives in it, has an awful lot of other stipulations of how the administration will consult with Congress. But at the end of the day, it helps trade agreements get passed. That expires in July. And actually, the effective date's a little earlier than that because there's a 90-day notice requirement to Congress. So say the US-UK agreement got finished, it would have to be notified to Congress by April 1st. If it goes beyond that, Congress would basically, if the agreement was close to being done or got done after that, Congress would have to pass an extension just for that agreement. But it's up in the air as whether there'll be a Trade Promotion Authority bill going forward next year to make this seamless. This is something that Farm Bureau policy has long supported. We believe we do better expanding our market opportunities through good trade agreements, so it's something we want to see happen. I think another important point to mention is the role of enforcement. Now, this administration has been very strong on bringing cases. We know the 301 cases with China, which led to the tariffs and the retaliation, and then ultimately did lead to the phase 1 agreement. But they've been very strong on enforcement of issues, both to protect and to try to force policy changes. So we'll see going forward what role that has in the future. And I think I'll just wrap up here a little bit before we get into any questions or other things you may want to talk about. With talking about the approach of this administration overall to trade. And I mentioned it earlier, I think, the phased approach. That was new. That was new. We were always used to, and again, I've been following these issues for a long time, always used to comprehensive agreements. There'd be 30 different chapters on everything you can think of, all kinds of complicated trade rules, and they took a long time. You know, they started a trade negotiation and say, oh, this will be 5-6 years or more. Well, the phased approach focusing on a few things, and primarily with China and Japan is where these phased approaches have taken place. Focusing on agriculture, also autos with Japan, other technical issues with China. They happened within about a year, year and a half. So they were able by, in a sense, trimming down the amount of subjects under discussion, focusing on a few big issues, and not going through Congress. Remember, both US China and US Japan have not been considered by Congress or executive agreements. We're able to get to a conclusion and make some inroads on trade. So we'll see if that approach continues. It was an interesting change that we think has brought some real results as far as we do going forward. I will stop there with my overall presentation. Happy to visit with you all about any questions you may have or some other issues you might want me to cover.
Todd, I can type any questions in through email.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Let me see if we have some questions here. We'll just type them in. Anybody have any questions? Man, you must be pretty thorough, Mr. Salmonsen.
I think he still can't hear us.
Okay.
I can-
Thank you for the presentation. I don't see any questions right now. Oh, hold on, Sue.
I'm not hearing anything. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong or something's coming through.
Concerned with heat coming in Zambia, with putting them out, so we want countries, cool. Infiltrated in our United States, we want to really push for that. And we also want to be able to vote. It's been every 5 years on these checkoffs. Because we think too much money is going to the CEO of our hard-earned money. We just want to be able to vote on that, take these checkoffs off.
We are concerned about how beef checkoff is affecting our markets. Is that a summation?
Concerns are the beef checkoff and where the money is being spent. And the lack of implementation. That finger's going on up there. While we get an answer for that question, does anybody else think of anything? Please raise your hand. You think you got it?
That one is on its way. If there's another question, we could go ahead and get it in the queue.
All right. Anybody think of any more questions?
Okay, I see a couple of questions came in, one on country of origin labeling. Let me go into that just a little bit, where that stands. I think all of you are familiar, but again, I've been here at Farm Bureau long enough. I can remember the times when there wasn't any policy on it. There was policy for voluntary, for mandatory. You now know our policy supports voluntary. Was there all through the time that the WTO case was brought when we did have the mandatory labeling by Canada and Mexico. That went through a panel decision, went to the appellate body of the WTO. Was ultimately said that the way the USDA was implementing it, was doing the labeling, did not pass muster, was discriminatory against Canada and Mexico. And then, of course, Canada and Mexico were given retaliation rights, which they still hold. And Congress decided in that appropriations bill back in 2017, I think, 2016 or 17, to take beef and pork out of the mandatory part of the labeling program. Now, earlier this year, I know USDA Secretary Perdue said that they're going to look into doing a new regulation. Might change how they approach it, try to do something that would go along the way to covering that. I've seen nothing come from that yet. I don't know how far they went with that, or if they decided that basically you needed, if they were going to really do another labeling program to include this beef or pork, beef and or pork, that they needed to go back and make some changes with Congress. There has been some legislation put in on the Senate side and the House side saying that we should go forward with kind of a different program that hasn't gotten any traction. And of course, we have a new Congress next year. All of the bills end, and if they're going to be considered next year, would have to be reintroduced. So that's just a little bit about the status of where that is. I think that's just an issue that if it's going to come back in any way, just needs to be worked on and see how it can work. Whether you try more through the regulatory approach with working on the label, or if you try a congressional path. But that's kind of the ways forward on that. Also, part of the question talked about the beef checkoff. I will punt on that one. Not an expert in the beef checkoff area and the impact that's having, other than I know a lot of activity that USDA does through their programs, through the market assistance program, go to promote a wide variety of US products around the world, including beef. Normally they would have been very busy doing trade shows and things like that. Obviously those were put on hold now, but they still maintain their market promotion programs. And remember, through the market assistance program, which gave funds for producers, for buying product, and for market promotion programs as a result of the impact of tariffs on our exports, there's been a lot more money. Actually, the market assistance program was effectively doubled from 200 million to 400 million to do more export promotion around the world. So there's a strong program there to help promote US ag. And I'll stop with that.
I'm assuming he still can't hear us.
He still can't hear us, but I can email.
Perfect. Any more questions for Mr. Salmonsen? I guess if you would sign off and thank him, we will keep moving. Thank you. I guess if you help me with the lights, Cole. We have a couple things that we can do before break. We do have amongst us.
Okay, it's been enjoyable for me to have the time to go through some of these trade issues with you all. I'll just finish up by saying there's always new things coming. We'll see what the next year brings, but we'll keep on top of all that. I certainly wish I could be there with everybody and see you all in person. We all do. And of course, we wish we were able to welcome you back to our office, but hopefully sooner rather than later, we can get back to the way we're used to doing business. So good day to everybody. Have a good rest of your meeting. So long.